Would you believe that there are no Bengali fashion history textbooks or resources out there in existence? Before we get started, I'd like to clarify for people not familiar with South Asian fashion exactly what a shaari is. If you are familiar with South Asian fashion, skip to the timestamp on the screen right now. Okay, so the shaari itself is basically a long strip of cloth that's wrapped around the body. It has two accompanying components, usually the petticoat, which is a long drawstring skirt that the shaari is tucked into, and the blouse, which is just the thing that covers the chest. Okay, that's it. In the 19th century, shaaris were the everyday common garment worn by all women. Shaaris were also usually not worn with blouses. This changed especially after the 1860s because of Victorian influence. The introduction of blouses wasn't the only British influence on fashion. During the Industrial Revolution, the British Empire suppressed garment making in its colonies. This meant that some lower class people were economically pressured into buying British clothing, which usually meant baggy dresses. Fast forward to the 1880s and 90s, blouses were the absolute norm for all women, regardless of social class. That being said, there were still differences in modesty depending on the social status of a woman. The higher the social class of a woman, the more strictly she would follow the social practice called porda, which revolved around modesty. This resulted in differences in how shaaris were worn and blouses were cut. So, for example, a lower class woman might have a blouse that's cut to show her midriff. She would also probably have short sleeves and wear the length of the shaari on her shoulder. On the other hand, an upper class woman might have a neckline that actually reaches her neck, have a blouse long enough to reach her petticoat, and may also wear the length of the shaari over her arm. Outside of these differences, shaaris throughout this time period were worn straight or close to the body. At the turn of the century, short-sleeved blouses were the norm, but sleeveless blouses weren't uncommon. The early years of the 1900s marked a transition period from wearing shaaris close to the body to fanning out the skirt and creating pleats. This only lasted a short while as pleats were out again by the 1930s. However, in the 30s, fuller skirts were still in fashion, as were elbow-length blouses. More of the length of the shaari was worn over the shoulder, revealing more of the skirt of the shaari. Creating a rounded swoop at the front of the shaari was popular as well. I'm trying my best to focus this video on middle-class fashion, but it seemed like it would be an oversight not to mention the Bengal famine of 1943, which mostly affected the poor. Among the lower class, blouses were out again for the first time in 80 years. Petticoats, which the shaaris are tucked into, are out as well, so many tied their shaaris to their waist, revealing their ankles and lower legs. For those not affected by the famine, a style emerged in which the length on the shoulder of the shaari would jut out instead of draping against the arm. During this time, sleeveless blouses became more acceptable for upper-class women, and pleats were a take-it-or-leave-it sort of deal. One defining feature of the 1950s were the first instances of salwar kameez being worn by adult women. Shaaris were still vastly more popular, and salwar kameez, which is an outfit comprised of a tunic, a pair of pants, and a long scarf, wouldn't become more popular until a few decades later. Another feature of this decade were short puffed sleeves on blouses. These were gone by the 1960s, being replaced by sleeveless or capped sleeve blouses. And then war and violence and government displacement happened as East Pakistan fought against West Pakistan for independence. The West Bengal territory in India was also affected during this time, as it was accepting many refugees from what is now Bangladesh. I don't want to say there were no changes in fashion during the 1970s and 80s, but from what I can tell, there was nothing distinctive going on during this time period. The 1990s were fun because it marked a huge transition period into the fashion that we see today. Salwar kameez became popular for women of all ages, including for those who were married. If you go to Bangladesh or West Bengal today, salwar kameez are by far the most common form of clothing worn by women. The salwar kameez of the 90s comprised of a long, loose tunic, which measured to a few inches below the knee, and loose cotton pants. At the end of the decade, the tunic's length was shortening to reach the knee. And that's all. I hoped you enjoyed that video. It took many hours of research because, again, nobody, from what I can tell, did this before. Please read the disclaimers in the description if you're gonna leave a comment. I don't know if anyone's gonna watch this video, but in case you do and you find something wrong with it, let me know, but also read the disclaimers down below. Most of the sources that I used are also going to be in the description. Okay, thanks. Bye.